for joining us here on Dojo Live today, Wednesday, the 11th of September, 2019, where we're going to have an informative, informal, and fun conversation with tech luminaries, right? So my name is Kim, broadcasting live from one of Nearsoft's offices in Hermosillo, Sonora, Mexico. Joining me are my usual co-hosts, Carlos Ponce in Mexico City,
Hi,
and
Kim.
Julio, who already introduced himself in Los Angeles. Hey guys, good to be here again. It's been a while. I think 2 months almost, according to my last check in here. Sorry about that, fans. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about some reasonable but often ignored tips on how to increase closing rate and advancement in negotiations. Right. So really interesting. And the key here, I guess, is trying to sell yourself first. So here to tell us more about how to do that is the author of two books, Digital Bacon, as well as Sell You Before You Sell. He is the founder and president of Yummy Marketing, Alex Rodriguez. Welcome to Dojo Live, Alex.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hello, nice to have you here. So, Alex, to get the ball going, if you could just tell us a bit more about yourself, your background.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to do that. So I founded Yummy Marketing almost 7 years ago, after a 24 plus year track record and experience in the marketing and advertising industries.
Wow.
I myself was born in New York City. My parents are Dominican, from the Dominican Republic, and at the ripe age of 7 years old, I was transported to the island. I grew up there. I went to school there, full on bilingual, actually Spanish immersion. And then that in the Dominican Republic was where I had my first steps in the advertising industry, working with large brands, large campaigns with local subsidiaries of international ad agencies. And then moved to the city of New York, where I continued my career, and then to Florida close to 20 years ago. And since then, I've been working with large brands in 4 different continents, 3 different languages, creating successful online experiences that have generated millions of dollars in sales in record period of time. As you mentioned, I have authored 2 books, of which the first one I've actually authored in English and Spanish as well, Digital Bacon, and in Spanish is Bacon Digital. So that book has been Amazon bestseller for different categories among 2 different languages. It's even required reading in some higher learning institutions, for being one of the very few books in the market that speaks about digital campaign creation from beginning to end. And then my latest book, which I hope to be the focus of our conversation today, because I think would be interesting to your audience, which is Sell You Before You Sell. I've got actually a copy right here, Sell You Before You Sell. Boost your brand, close more sales, and win your game is the latest book. So we can definitely take the conversation from there.
All right, perfect. So before we get into that, did you want to share a bit more about Yummy itself, your product and your service, or would you like to hop right into Sell You before you sell yourself?
Absolutely. No, I can just give you a quick summary. So Yummy Marketing, we're here in downtown Tampa, and we're a creative firm that helps successful companies raise their visibility, evolve their brand, and attract more business. The way we do that is a 3-pronged approach. The first approach is through highly engaging creative production. So we create creative assets, visual assets, content assets for companies looking to get their exposure out there and clarify their message. The second prong would be through campaign traffic building campaigns. So we do all sorts of digital advertising, retargeting, search optimization, and other types of campaigns. And then the third prong would be lead generation, specifically lead generation, which is our latest offering into the market. Where to bring leads and sales to their department. We just do all the work for them, and we charge on a per lead basis. So it's a 3-pronged approach. Often some companies will need just 1 or 2 of them. So that's in the advantage of our system, which is pretty much a la carte. We don't shove our whole offering to every business. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
We sit down on a consultative approach, and we tailor their solution depending on which need that client has.
Okay, I have a burning question, Kim. I have to ask this question.
Go for it.
Sure.
There's a lot of food-oriented naming conventions what gave birth to this? Is this like are the founders a bunch of foodies? Stories around that? I'm just thinking about yummy and bacon.
I did my homework on bacon. I know it's an acronym for the different phases, right? The steps through the process.
Good job.
Okay.
Yeah, good job. Yeah,
I do not know the history behind Yummy, however.
Yeah, Digital Bacon, it is based on an acronym. And in fact, a lot of our in-house systems are like the launch recipe, and it's all around kind of food. My very first business card, instead of president, said Top Chef, which seemed to confuse a few people. They thought that I was a cook. And I do cook.
There's a TV show.
Yeah, I do cook, but it's only for my family. I wouldn't.
Get everyone on that show.
However, the name Yummy. Well, the first thing is that I'm a geek for palindromes, right? And actually, this week is a palindrome week. If you take the date for every day of this week and you read it backwards and forwards, it's the exact same sequence of numbers.
I did see that circling there on Facebook.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. But Yummy, the way we spell it with YMMY without the U, it is also a palindrome. So I thought I'd spell it in a different way, in an eye-catching way. And you, Kim, actually, before the interview, you mentioned, how do you pronounce it? Is it Yummy? Is it? And in my mind, whenever somebody asks that question to me, I say I won, because I made you think about my brand, right? So, so Yummy, it's just an analogy for making brands attractive and satisfying, which is the end of marketing. At the end of the day, that's what we're all looking to do with our brands: attracting people that will consume and then satisfying them in the end.
I think that's really important, that the two-step combination. Actually, this makes me, I know I'm kind of redirecting here a little bit, but recently my family and I went to an ice cream shop here in Hermosillo, and the whole technique is that they sell you like these rolls of ice cream. Like they put the cream out on like a cold bed and they roll it up, and it's beautiful, right? It's beautiful. Like we got our Instagram photo, but in my opinion, it wasn't delicious. And it was a very small quantity, actually, for the amount, in my opinion, for the amount of money that I paid. And I thought, like, gosh, and I'm left wondering a year from now, 2 years from now, and I wish them the best of luck, of course, but are they going to be here? Is this business going to be here? Because it was attractive, but it's not satisfying.
Not satisfying.
And I don't think I'll be going back.
It has to be memorable. I mean, that's the sort of unspoken rule of actually most of the iconic brands in the world. They're memorable. Create memorable experiences. So it was an experience, but it wasn't memorable, unfortunately, your ice cream experience.
Absolutely.
So I have to tell you, like I said, I did my homework a little bit, but I'm much, much more prepared to talk about Digital Bacon more than I am to sell you before you sell. But we're going to do what you want to do, right? The guest is always right. But I think I have a good question here, because I mean, we talked about this being an acronym, and this processes of which you can follow to kind of increase your digital presence and success. You said the bacon, the B is based on reality, A is aimed toward results, C creatively developed, O organized in propagation, and N finally is numerically measured. One of my questions was, and I noticed, and had I done my homework better, I would realize that, your second book is the newer one. My question for you was, in this past 5 years, because my understanding that Digital Bacon is about 5 years old now.
Yeah.
And coming up, in the technological sphere, in this digital sphere, it's something that's constantly changing. And one of my questions for you was this idea of, are these types of techniques timeless, or do you find that you have to also adapt to these changes that are happening around you? And, is there any particular area or part of that process or phase that needs to adapt or evolve faster than the others?
No, that's a fantastic question. So just to clarify, BACON, the acronym that I include in the book Digital Bacon, they're actually qualities of a successful digital campaign. So based on reality, aimed towards results, creatively developed, organized in propagation, numerically measured. Those are qualities that you can see from successful campaigns, and they don't even have to be digital. And in fact, if you look at successful campaigns in the 60s or 70s, you'll see that they also embrace these 5 qualities. It's just that in the digital era, particularly the last characteristic, which is numerically measured, has become much more easier to implement. Right. So the idea is that these are the 5 qualities to strive for. Now, how do you implement tactics in order to strive for these qualities? that does change, and it changes month to month, year to year. And this is where the content of anything that we put out there, any recommendations, should always be updated. Now, quite frankly, when I wrote my book, I made sure to have, and when I published the book, to have the least amount of very specific tools or tactics out there. It was more talking about principles, and here are some ways you can implement it. But as long as you have your principles in place, the finding the right tools to pursue those principles, it becomes a secondary matter at that point, because you are on track on how to develop the successful campaign in the way that you should.
That actually makes a lot of sense. So I guess, where then does this idea of sell you before you sell fit into this picture, and why is that a current matter of importance?
Yeah, no, well, we're coming from the digital.
Alex, if I could, I don't mean to interrupt. I want to give you a little more context behind that question, because I think it's very relevant and timely, even internally to us here. This conversation we've had for the past few weeks, where it used to be you could just do some traditional block and tackle, get really creative with some advertising, some social campaigns and newsletters and what have you, right? And it seems that's shifting now. I'm seeing individual influencers who become the voice and brand of the company, who are using things like video with a really cool caption because people watch them without even listening to them, right? Yep. So I'm personally curious to understand this shift that's happening, and I'm not sure if this is where it goes, because it's a new book, we haven't read it yet, but I'd love to understand, to Kim's point, what's happening here? Why is that so important?
Yeah, no, that's I'd love to take the conversation in that direction. So, basically my first book was about digital campaigns and how brands and businesses can use digital platforms and digital channels in order to reach their intended audience. The second idea is that most businesses have this aversion to sales. The word sales becomes like you're talking about my mama, It's like, what are you talking about my mama? And I'm not talking about your mama. I'm just saying that sales are a vital endeavor for all types of businesses, no matter what. But it might be the vacuum cleaner's fault, the one that knocked over the doors and we had to open the door and we were in our pajamas and we were ashamed and we said, I hate sales, right? And we put the whole of sales in that bucket of undesirable experiences, when it doesn't have to be that way. At the end of the day, sales is just sitting down and agreeing on exchange of value, right? But the other phenomenon that has occurred in this digital era is that attention has become a rare and scarce resource for us, right? So with online, social media, mobile devices, all sorts of screens of different sizes that are competing for our attention, it's easier than ever to output messages into the ether and to grab your attention. Now, the question here is, are all signals valuable in the same manner, right? And this is where I insert this idea about attention being a currency system. And some people may think that I'm going a little bit too far by calling attention a currency system, but think about it. Attention is limited. It's a limited resource. It's highly regarded. It's received as an exchange of value. And in fact, in the advertising field, you could say that we are peddlers of goods in exchange for attention, right? So when you think about human attention as a currency system, every single day that you wake up, you have a limited amount of that attention in your attention purse. And therefore, you have to guard that attention very closely. And what it looks like from the eyes of an audience member is that they will exchange audience only for those things that are valuable to them in advance. Now, when you think about sitting down with a prospect and presenting your goods and saying, would you consider buying that? Certainly that's a moment that they have to carve out of their day and sit down, with you. But for them to agree to that moment, to listen and just have a sales presentation, something occurs well in advance. And what occurs is a first transaction, right? So I call that moment where they're sitting at the table or, exchanging value or signing a contract on the fly. That's called a second transaction. The very first transaction is the transaction of attention, right? It's that first moment when they hear about your value, about what you're about. What is your credibility? What is your authority? What are you about? What is your experience? Are you the right person qualified to present this value?
The famous elevator pitch.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And if you have a valuable presentation in that very first transaction, they will agree to proceed with that first transaction, which is depositing their attention in exchange for that value that you have, right? So unless that first transaction takes place, then the second transaction never has a chance. And the reason why businesses do not fulfill more transactions of the second type is that they have not closed more transactions of the first type. So this is where the whole idea about selling yourself before you sell takes place. A research that I have in the book states the following: in B2B sales, they interviewed hundreds of different businesses that put out requests for proposal, and they reported back that 85 or 86% of the time they already have which supplier is going to, or they prefer to win the bid before the bids are submitted. So in other words, they do a request for a proposal, a bunch of people submit their proposals, and they already have a desire on which they would prefer to be the winning candidate. And that's, believe it or not, that's going to have an influence. Now after that, obviously they need to see the timeline and budget and all these things, but they are already biased on who they desire to win the bid well in advance. Now, where do you think that comes from? That comes from the transaction of attention, because that supplier has already shown up, has already demonstrated their authority and their credibility well in advance.
When I was with the Big Four consultings and we bid on very large projects, the very first question I would ask a principal or partner was, who wrote the RFP? Because it's true. Those decisions were already made before they go out to tender. It becomes a formality.
Yeah.
So what are you proposing here in the book in terms of getting that attention, selling yourself? Like, what's the magic bullet if there is one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure everybody's waiting to hear what that is, right? Unless you're Gary Vee, where you've got like 10 million plus followers and you're putting content every 2 hours. Yeah. His businesses thrive because of him, right? He's a brand. He's the influencer, right? So what do you do if you're not that guy, right? How does that work? Yeah,
well, I mean, you hinted at the solution a little while ago, and it's that companies today are moving towards a trend of humanization of their brand. So whereas before it was perfectly fine for companies to put out a logo, put out a slogan, and then hide behind all those layers of just corporate branding, now in this day and age, largely because of digital and social media, companies have seen the need to say, you know what, let's elevate the profile of our leaders, because we will close business on the helm of the credibility and the authority of those faces that we are putting forth. So yes, while I'm not proposing, you open your own, every employee should open their own YouTube channel or anything like that, there is a time and a place for employees of a corporation to step up and say, this is why you should listen to me, and create those transactions of attention, which are going to flow into a higher closing rate, a higher proposal acceptance rate.
So I'm just talk personal experience ourselves. We set that initiative out last fall. About 6 people signed up, but really only 2 took it forward, made the effort. It's a tremendous amount of work. Any tips, advice, or things that are working that work better than others? Like why would someone want to push? I mean, is it just purely, hey, I'm interested in helping the company grow? Is there some personal benefit from this? Your research, what does it show? Why would I want to do this, for example?
So you're speaking specifically about why would an employee within an organization want to step up and represent the company?
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
but
I see.
Enough, you think that people would just sign up and do that, but there's not a lot of people who actually I don't know, I don't want to put myself out there like that. It was surprising that there weren't a lot of people that would want to do that. So I'm curious, what's the benefit? How do you not sell them, but at least show them the benefit of why they should do that?
Yeah. Well, there are two factors at play. One is the motivation factor, which is always something, you need coaching and you need leadership for that. But then the second one is the knowledge factor, right? Why should I do this? Just as you framed the question. So I think that those two can work against an employee, and it's like, why should I, I'm not feeling motivated to do that. And why is the rational, the set of reasons why I should step up and do it. And the fact of the matter is that, number one, if you're part of an organization, all employees speak about we. So we do this, we went to a company outing, and you feel like an organic part of that company. So therefore, why wouldn't you step up and represent the company in a way that benefits the company, but also benefits you? I mean, that's just an organic marrying of the two, of you as a professional and the overall company vision. But then number two, it's for career advancement. So if the company is allowing you the opportunity to step up and represent yourself, that's going to benefit you as well, because you're creating a name for yourself. You're adding that to your career experience and your resume as well. So I think that those two work in tandem. There's in the book, I mentioned 4 qualities, and from Digital Bacon and Sell You can see that I like these formulas. And maybe that's another area that we can take the conversation on, the 4 qualities of a successful business profile.
Kim, you got some additional questions? I can keep talking for an hour on this.
Yeah.
No, I was just interested
dominate
in
the whole conversation.
the idea of motivating employees or leadership roles to kind of become that digital face in a way of a company. And I think there's motivation in this idea of what's in it for me, why should I? But I think that there's something else at play, and this would be this idea of fear or vulnerability, or I don't even know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So are there practical tips on how to, and maybe that's what these next 4 steps that you're talking about are, is like, how can I become that? Let's say I'm interested. Yeah. Let's say I'm motivated. Let's say, I'm sold. I get it. We need this, but how could it be me? Right.
Yeah. No, definitely. And that's where the imposter syndrome and issues like that kick in. I actually wrote the book. I structured the book out before writing it. And when I finished writing the whole book, I said, you know what, there's a chapter that's missing, because I identified exactly what you're pointing out. And I identified that there are these lies that we tell ourselves that this is not for me. I'm not the right person. Nobody should do this. And we tell these lies to ourselves. So I included a chapter, and I placed it in the book early enough in the book about those 9 lies that we tell each other. And I'm not going to list all of them here, but one of them is simply, I'm not an expert. Why should I do this? I'm not the right person to do that. And the fact of the matter is that information today is so accessible that, it's hard to call, and information is the development of technologies and science and all of these practical things that we handle in our business is moving so quickly that really, at the end of the day, who is an expert at all things? We all need updating of our skills. So if you're working in any field for a significant number of time, you already have sufficient knowledge to stand up and speak from your experience. Mm-hmm. Now, we do that in an attitude, at least I do that, in an attitude of humility and saying, this is my current understanding and this is what I know. If I need to revise it, I'm completely open in revising it, but I will stand up boldly for what I know and understand up to this point. And by doing that, you're already accomplishing 90% over what anybody else does in your field, because you're just standing boldly for an idea that you've experienced, that you've tried, that works for you, that has helped advance your company or your clients. And just by doing that, you're separating yourself from the rest.
That call to courage. I know this isn't what this is about, but last night, for like the second or third time, I watched Brene Brown's talk on Netflix, which is amazing. And she's, of course, studies shame and vulnerability. And I think that's a lot of what you're talking about, this idea of like, okay, this call to courage, I'm going to step into the arena and I'm going to fight. And even if I fail and get knocked down, here I am.
Exactly.
I'm going to sell me.
Absolutely.
Right. You can't.
Alex, I have a quick question. Sorry. I'm sorry. I was just going to say that. I mean, we'll be wrapping up shortly, and before we do that, I have a question, Alex, and please forgive me because I haven't been a little bit silent, but I've been trying to listen to you grab a couple of ideas to quote in real time for our audience and yours. And when I was doing that, I grabbed something that you mentioned, which is, companies today are moving towards a humanization of their brand. So my question to you would be, what do you think is going to happen to those companies that do not move in this direction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's a great threat, because while other companies are understanding that it's no longer B2C nor B2B, now we're on a P2P world, right? Peer-to-peer or person-to-person.
Mm-hmm.
And the great risk of not moving in this direction is just disconnecting from the reality that is really the whole business culture, is that I know that I can reach out to any CEO or any president through LinkedIn, through a private message. I know that I'm one step away from anyone. And I think the great risk is to, when the rubber meets the road, and when, all things considered, all other competition options in the marketplace seem exactly the same, consumers and even people in business and business-to-business sales will gravitate towards those contacts that they are trusting. Business is established once trust is established, right? So at the end of the day, that's kind of the risk. And the risk is missing out from your competitors that are already on this wave that is so important.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't participate, no bacon for you. No bacon for you.
You missed the bacon.
So before we were up on time, but I have one more question. What's working better, and what do you suggest works better? Is it because it used to be like you needed to show up as a thought leader, right? So you go and you post something that's more of a thought leadership piece. But is it more about asking a question? And this goes back to the conversation of, I'm not an expert, right? So what matters more, being able to spark a conversation, or showing up and saying, I have something to offer, or a combination of the two? Based on your research, what's best?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of both, and it really depends on the scenario. So for example, in an area in which your audience may be hungry for solid information, and maybe that information that nobody's talking about, that's where the leaders in a corporation should step up and say, let me inform you on this, because I want to alert you so you don't make a wrong decision, or so you can make an informed decision on this. So there's a time and a place for that. But at the same time, I think spaces like yours, in which you're having frank conversations and you're inviting people to interact, shows a level of authenticity and transparency that has been lacking in the corporate culture for many years. And now we finally have the opportunity, not that most businesses are on this, but we have the opportunity to do that in a scalable, swift, and economic manner. So there is a time and a place for content, just passive consumption, but there's also an area in which interaction and just talking to people and welcoming their idea and their insights and feedback is something that we can take advantage of as well.
Right, and I think that's our mindset. This idea of this globalization, like the world just gets smaller and smaller, and the need for those conversations and this interaction with people who are different from you in all shapes and senses of the word, is an increasing reality and need, and we have to learn and know how to maneuver in such a world.
In fact, Alex, we're reformatting this particular show specifically around culture to have that conversation. I mean, there's such polarizing views in the world today. Yes. On both sides of the fence, no matter whether it's politics or religion or what have you, that it just really comes down to lack of understanding. And so we want to bridge that gap, that cultural gap. I think we definitely need to have you back when we do launch that format, because I'm curious to see how this kind of initiative and what you're talking about, the impact that has on a culture within an organization, especially cultures that have multiple locations all over the world, right? There's one way to be in a certain country that it is in another. So I'd be curious to learn what you've learned and share that with the audience. And we're up on time. It's been a pleasure to have you, man. We could have gone for an hour. Speaking about attention spans, the reason this is only 25 minutes or 30 minutes, because that's all the attention span. And I'm guessing that's why we're going to get shorter over time, but that's why we're up. So, Kim, if you could wrap it up, or Carlos, thank you.
Sure. I think I would invite our guest, Alex, to wrap it up for us. Alex, is there any kind of last words of wisdom or any one last thing you'd like to share with today's viewers and listeners?
Absolutely. So just to wrap up, the big idea that I'm bringing today is that attention is the most valuable currency of our day. Think about that in your message, in your interactions with clients, with audiences, and think about how you can bring more value in advance, regardless of whether they're a client, regardless of whether the sale goes through. Just bring value, and that in itself will create a snowball to close business. And I don't know if this is a good time to mention, other websites that they can reach us at.
Sure.
You can reach Yummy Marketing at ymmymarketing.com. ymmymarketing.com, and I'm more than happy to speak about opportunities to collaborate together. And then with regard to the book, digitalbaconbook.com is where you can see everything about Digital Bacon. And then sellyoubeforeyousell.com, you can see more about the topic that we discussed here today.
We'll make sure we have all those links on your nearsoft.dojo page.
Awesome.
Dojo Live page.
Thank you very much for your time today, Alex. It was a pleasure to get to know you and to learn about you as well as Yummy and your books and methods and just like those timeless principles that we could all learn from. Carlos?
Well, the only thing left for me, Alex, is thank you for having agreed to meet with us a second time and with bringing new insights to the industry of marketing and digital marketing and pretty much everything that your company does. So thank you. Big, heartfelt, warm thank you for you. And let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Always here. Bye.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Goodbye.
Ruben?